Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words. For every show, I talk to writers about their work and how they do what they do. For those who don't know, the show is available by the same name on both YouTube and via all of the major podcast platforms. So you can subscribe to either or preferably to both, so you never miss a thing. And if you don't mind, if you do go to one of those, please leave me a nice 5-star review. It really does help other people find the show. And I think they're going to really want to find today's show because my guest today, Lowell Cauffiel, has a stellar background in so many areas. An investigative journalist, a true crime author, a crime novelist, a screenwriter, a producer. He's even the founder of a nonprofit. So I think you get the picture. He's a very busy guy, which is why I really appreciate him joining me today to talk about his new novel, Below the Line, which if you're watching on the YouTube channel, you can see the cover right there next to him on his right. I'm in the middle of it right now. It's a great book, a lot of fun, and I think the tagline describes it the best. It says it skewers Hollywood from an insider's point of view in a deliciously fresh way. I totally agree. Lowell Cauffiel, welcome to the Open Mic. Thanks for being here today.
It's my pleasure to be here and shamelessly promote the book with that big thing I've got propped up in my living room. I figure, what the heck? Why not? Let people see the cover, huh?
Oh, absolutely, man. That's the whole point of being on YouTube, right? You got the visuals here, so it'll share. I absolutely, because it's a great cover, actually. I really I like the cover a lot. It's colorful and it's eye-catching, and I think it does you well. So let's talk about the new book, Below the Line, because I've seen reviews that compare it favorably to the likes of Elmore Leonard, which I think we'd all agree is pretty high praise. I agree with it. I love Elmore Leonard, and as I'm reading it, I'm loving the mix of grit and some humor. Tell us a bit more about the book.
Well, that's no accident. Dutch was one of my mentors. We're both from Detroit originally. And when I started writing books, I called him up. I was shaking. I was so scared to call him up. This is years ago. And he says, "Come on over for lunch. And we'll make some grilled cheese sandwiches." And so I would sit down and have these lunches with him at his house in Birmingham, and he'd give me his like rules of writing and stuff. And it was a huge influence on me. Uh, below the line, below the line, I had done a book in 10 years. I'd done a lot of nonfiction books, true crime books, and then a few crime novels. And then I worked in, film and television industry for 20 years. And then COVID hit, and I sold a lot of pilots and made some good money doing it, but they would never get on the air, which is very typical of for Hollywood writers. In fact, I know some Hollywood writers that have written sold 25 pilots and still never got one up on the air. If you get one up on the air though, and it lasts, you're going to make a lot of money. But anyway, so I thought, I want to do my 10th book. I got to round it out here. I had 9. I wanted to get my 10th book, and I thought, what do I want to do? And then I realized, write what you know. So what I was doing is kind of taking my Midwest Detroit mentality, transferring it into the business, which I had done, and looking at LA and the business from that point of view. And I do it through a character named Edwin Blake, homicide cop. From Detroit, who one day a film crew is shooting in his office in Detroit Police Headquarters, and he starts telling them everything they're doing wrong because he starts criticizing the way they're, practicing the interview for the movie and all that. And he ends up getting hired by the director to act as a consultant, which then leads him out to LA. And he's getting up in age, 48, 49 years old. He has a couple of good years. And then all of a sudden, sort of the bottom drops out. And now he's not getting any work. And he doesn't want to go back to Detroit. Once you get a taste of it out here, you don't want to go back to the deep snow and the ruts in the street in the middle of the winter and all the things you got to deal with. And what happens then, the inciting incident is the producer who he originally worked for gives him a call, summons him to his Malibu house, very glassy Malibu house, the ocean view, and says, "Hey, I'm doing a new original TV series, and I want you to be the consultant, and except I need a favor first, and that favor is to go find a woman and child of a friend who has lost track of his wife and his kid in L.A." And of course, he's not going to get paid for it. He's working on the promise of a future job. This is just classic Hollywood. I mean, the amount of crap that is thrown at you, they want you to do for free and on spec, and nobody wants to pay any money. They want the studios to pay. They want the networks to pay. Producers don't want to pay. And there's a great line actually in the meeting where he says, well, JP, that's the name of the producer, JP. He says, it takes, that's about $600 a day to do that kind of work. And he says, I haven't got any money from the studio yet. So he ends up doing it for free, and it all starts from there. So it looks like things are looking up, but his life has gone to the positive, but it's got a lot of baggage that's going to come with it. And that's what essentially the journey of that protagonist is.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned, okay, so you'd written several books before this, and then got into TV in Hollywood. But that's a pretty long gap, 20 years between your last book, which came out in 2003, and now. Was it hard for you in that time to not be working on a book, even though I know you were doing other things? Were you ready at that time to maybe leave that part of the work experience behind? And then was it hard for you later to get back into the swing of writing a novel and the rhythm of writing a novel?
It was a real difficult transition back. After, you learn when you're doing film and television screenwriting, you can't get into anybody's head. You've got to show everything. Everything has got to be on camera. You're not going to know the character's thoughts unless they say it in dialogue, but then that's called, laying pipe. You don't want too much of that either. It's moving pictures. Everything's got to be moving and all that. So you kind of lose those skills as a novelist. And when I went back to it, it took a while to get my sound back and to have I hate to use the word courage. Courage is people who go fight in wars, but to have the courage to go inside my character's head and let him have a point of view and do his thoughts. And of course, a lot of his thoughts were my thoughts because, like I said, I was transferring my experience through this guy about the traffic, about the way people act, about the passive aggressive nature of LA, about the superficiality of LA, all the bullshit of LA. I mean, the West Side here is and a good part of LA is run by show business, and it's show business. It's not show friendship. Right. It's show business.
And it's a brutal business. I remember I can't remember. I must have been close to 20 when I moved to LA in the early 80s, lived in West Hollywood on Poinsettia between Santa Monica and Sunset, and had the bonds at the end of the street and all that stuff that I can remember walking past the Sunset Grill on the way to my bank, and things like that, because I felt like the only guy in all of West LA that walked a lot. It's a completely different environment, I think, than most people would ever be used to. But I want to stay on that question though for just a second though, because in that time, you're still writing stories, you're still creating. Did you have storylines in your head at that time that you were writing pilots for, or anything you thought, oh, I ought to just write a book on this?
I think I tried that earlier when I didn't sell a show when I first got out here. And there was this one show I put together and I didn't sell it. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll turn that into a novel. And it just wasn't working. But what I have learned out here, and this has been the good thing about working for film and television. And I don't know if you know who Robert McKee is. He's the very famous screenwriter, but he's really not screenwriting teacher, but he's really a story teacher. He teaches about story. What are the elements of story? And what I learned is that whether you're writing a novel or whether you're writing a screenplay, it's the same principles. It's an inciting incident. Somebody's life gets jacked up out of shape, either to the positive or the negative. And, away you go as that person or those people try to put their life back in balance. Now, what the other novels I've written, now when I did like nonfiction crime, it was highly organized. I'd have a whole bulletin board with index cards of certain dates and all this, because you get sued for, you make a mistake, you're a journalist, or the routine on that. You want to have it right. But what I learned in doing novels is if I can create a great character and I can put him in a situation that I can just turn these people loose and they will write the book. I don't plan it out. I usually will know what's the inciting incident and what will it take to put it back in place. And as I write, I'm heading towards that, but sometimes what puts it back in place has nothing to do with what I originally thought. It's kind of like you're like channeling. Okay, you're channeling your imagination. Now, the only way you can do that, though, and I used to tell writers I taught this, you have got to have done the appropriate research. The key to great fiction is great research. Same as nonfiction. You got to bring in all that. You got to build that. I heard somebody say that writers are like bag ladies. They fill their shopping carts up with all kinds of information and carry it around, never knowing what they're going to use at any one time. And you have to build that up. And writing is, I'm old school. If I'm going to write about a cop, I'm going to go ride with that cop for a week. I want to hear how they talk. I want to hear what it sounds like. What does the squad scarf smell like? You're not going to get that on Google. You're not going to get that by watching other movies. That's my journalism background. And so if you build up enough of that, now Elmore had Greg Sutter as his researcher, and he would go out and he'd interview all these people and he'd do these video presentations to Dutch. And so Dutch had all that stuff. Greg actually is one of the blurbs on the back of Below the Line. He's an old friend of mine, another Detroiter. So that's what I try to do. And I just channel it and let it go. They take over. I know those people better than my own family.
I'm sorry?
I know those characters better than my own family.
Because they come alive in your head, and that's I mentioned before we came on the air. I mentioned I have my own manuscript that my agent's working with right now, and I'm curious to some extent, maybe if you've had a similar experience, because I have been going back and forth with this thing for years, and I know a lot of writers will tell you that they've got one or two or 10 manuscripts that they worked on that they then put in the drawer and they just they weren't going to go, but it helped them get to where they could write stuff that was commercially viable and would sell. But it was part of the process to go through the ones where you just have to say it's not going to work. And that's fine. I think we've all done that. But my own work in progress, I'm like a dog with a bone. I cannot let this thing go. And I've been playing around with it for a long, long time. And so I'm just curious well, let me backtrack even a little bit, because you're talking about, these characters better than your own family. I think that's part of it. Is I've worked on it so long, I feel like I can't get these characters out of my head, and so I can't. Walking away from it would almost be like walking away from my family. So I can't do that, right? Have you ever had an experience like that, or were you smarter than me and learned how to walk away when something wasn't working?
Well, I've had to learn to walk away out here, in LA, because I was pitching a lot of television, and television can break your heart in 5 different places. You can put together a great idea, a great pitch, and you go to pitch it and they don't buy it. You can go and pitch well and they buy it. And then you write the script, but they decide not to shoot it. You can go ahead and shoot it, but they decide not to pick it up. You can get it on the air and they cancel it after 3 episodes. But as we say, if you can get, and then you can go a whole year and be canceled after a year. But as we say, if you can go 100 episodes, you're going to make $50 million. So it's worth rolling the dice every time. So I've had to let go. I've sold pilots, great stories, great stuff that where the top executives like at NBC and HBO, it was their favorite pilot, but then Comcast buys NBC and now everybody gets paranoid. Oh, we got to go with Dick Wolf, and yet his show gets canceled in 3 episodes. There's so many things beyond your control. So I've been beaten into submission on that. So I will let it go. Have I ever abandoned something myself because it wasn't working? I think so, but I can't remember. I've probably suppressed it.
Well, we've mentioned here, we've talked a little bit about that you did true crime as well. And you were very successful. You won a lot of awards doing this. Yeah. Of course, you were a journalist. That's your background.
New York Times bestseller.
Yeah.
My last true crime book was a New York Times bestseller. Yeah.
Absolutely. Did you ever consider just staying with true crime, or was it too limiting for you? What moved you out of that genre into writing novels and the TV and the other things you've been doing?
2 things. The first one was I became clinically depressed after the 5th book, House of Secrets. It was so dark. It was paranormally dark. It was so intense. And 2 years of research. Then when I finished the research, I didn't even know I was clinically depressed. I was clinically depressed. And I tried to write it, and I only got 30 pages out in 3 months. I said, well, this is crazy, man. I'm a 4 to 8 page a day guy. And so I told the publisher, screw it, dude. I'm not doing this book. It's too dark. I can't handle it. Well, then they were going to sue me. And then I saw a 60 Minutes thing on depression with Mike Wallace, William Styron, and Rod Steiger. And as they were describing their depression, I thought, oh my God, man, that's exactly what I'm suffering from. And they said, you can take this test at Johns Hopkins online. And I took it, and the results came back, and it said, seek immediate medical attention. And I was in trouble, man. And so I went on antidepressants, and within a week, I pulled out of it, and I wrote that book in 2 months. I was writing 10 to 12, 15 pages a day. I felt like I was writing my way out of hell on a ladder. And I turned it over to the publisher, said, I want to hear about it, and I want to see the cover, and I want nothing to do with it anymore. And then like a year and a half later, I said, I'm on a New York Times bestseller list with it. I called up the editor. I said, I'm on a New York Times bestseller list. Why didn't you tell me? And they were laughing. They said, well, we figured, you didn't want to hear about it. But that's what finished me off true crime. I got to the point, Rich, where I had no faith in humanity anymore. It was, have you ever seen the movie Truman or Capote? Where the one with and he goes and he gets involved with these guys, killers, and then with the family, and he goes into this depression, and he's very troubled at the end of it. And my girlfriend at the time, she saw it with me. She said, was it like that for you? And I said, yeah, try 5 times. And I tell you what the problem is that one day you're with a killer and you're his buddy. You're 5 feet away from him in a interview room in a prison. I'm sure you know what those are like. Mm-hmm. And whatever move you've made to get that interview, and I'd go see these guys. I'd set up a schedule once a week and run tape, for like 6 months. And then the next day you're with the family and they're crying and they're hugging you and you're going like, who am I? Who's the psychopath here? That's what got to me. I sort of lost myself. So, and then to finish it off, I think OJ finished off true crime. The OJ case was like the ultimate orgasm in true crime. And, it went to paperback originals. Publishers started saying, why don't we hire these guys like Cauffiel and Jack Olson and Hugh Ainsworth and, Steve Michaud and Joe McGinnis, and their hardcovers. They want $100,000 to do the research and all that. These are story-driven let's just get some guy that writes for AP who's going to rewrite this stuff that he heard in court and do a quick paperback original. And so the money went out of it. You have to have the money in true crime because if you're going to do a correct true crime book, what happens in court is a little slice of what the crime is about. Yeah. I always looked at the court cases like a Rolodex. Here's the people I need to talk to.
But, yeah, I have a very, very good friend in Las Vegas who's finishing up a book that he does have a contract for, and it's very dark. He had a terrible time selling it because it's not a happy story. It's human trafficking and corrupt cops, and and it's all true. He's and he's an investigative reporter by trade, and so he's just a dog with it. But he's had to hire bodyguards, to protect him and his family. Like if he goes to certain interviews, he has to spend out of his pocket because the publisher won't do it. He's got to spend money to be protected, as best he can. And he's not a big guy; he's a little guy, really. And I cannot see him ever writing another one of these. I can't see his wife letting him write another one of these, to be honest with you. You're trying to raise a family and just, I've often wondered about the psychological aspect of this. You're the first true crime author, though, who's made it as clear as you have the impact that it could have on you. Because
horrible.
I think you wouldn't be human if you could tell those stories and not have it impact you to some extent.
Well, and I had that veneer, that journalism veneer, pretty strongly in place for several, first 2 or 3 books, but it eventually chipped it away. And Eddie Lee Sexton, the villain in House of Secrets, that was the name of the book, House of Secrets, and it was a father of 13 kids who goes on a cross-country crime spree, and he's having incest with his daughters to create this super race, and then he's ordering his daughters to kill babies and her beard, and on and on it went. That was the first perpetrator I didn't want to interview. I said, I had so much material on him. I said, I don't even want to spend any time in a room with this guy. Yeah. I see the wreckage of what he's done, but in a true crime book has got to have some redeeming quality to it. I mean, there's got to be a hero in there too, whether it's a cop or it's a survivors, somebody who brings the person to justice, that it's got to have that element to it. It can't just be all dark.
Yeah. Well, I remember reading something years ago, and I've asked several of the authors that have come on this show this question because I think it's pertinent. I read David Simon, of course, who wrote The Wire and Treme and other things like that. But he was talking about a scene in The Wire where a character jumps out of a parking garage, and he's on the 4th floor, and he survives, right? Because he's being chased by the bad guys. He jumps out, he survives, walks away. Not well, but he survives. And so later on, at some conference, somebody was saying, did that really happen? Because he's acknowledging this was based on a real person, real event, and this person's all skeptical. And he said, well, no, you're right. It didn't quite happen like that. He actually jumped from the 6th story of this parking garage, but I thought nobody would ever believe that he survived falling that far. So I made it the 4th story. And I mean, I'm sure it just quieted everybody, right? So I know you're not a cop, but you've been involved around so much of this stuff in your career, and maybe not even just around crime, bad shit like that, but just in Hollywood. Hollywood is one of the stranger places anybody will ever be, I guarantee you. Have you ever had something that you wanted to write, whether it's for TV or one of your novels, and you said, no one's going to believe that, even though I know it happened, but they're not going to believe it?
It's funny you bring this up. I got a great story regarding this, and that's true. Like when you're writing nonfiction, the crazier and more unbelievable it is, the better it is in nonfiction. But when you're writing fiction, it's got to be believable, right? It's got to be logical. It's got to be rational. I always say writing a novel is like writing a massive lie. And the only way that you can pull off that lie is you have to have all the little details truthful. I mean, I get really irritated when, there was there was a TV show up that was set in Detroit, and they had a homicide cop threatening a guy with the death penalty to try to get him to talk. Michigan was the first English-speaking country in the world to outlaw the death penalty in 1860. I mean, they lost me right there. But anyway, when I finished Below the Line, and I had an agent that was representing it, and his wife read it too. She was also in the agency. I didn't sign her up. He liked it actually, but after he talked to her, he says, "You know what? Nobody's going to buy this. Nobody's going to buy this because these Hollywood people are acting irrationally. They're doing irrational things. This guy's, set up this like plausible deniability situation. And where did he get that idea?" I said, "Well, he got that idea from a movie that he made. He was applying it to his own reality." "Yeah, but it's irrational. Nobody's going to believe that." And I said, "That's the whole point of the book. That's the whole point of these characters. And that's what gives us the humor, right?" I mean, the reviews I'm getting, people are talking about laughing out loud at some of the lines and some of the logic. I mean, there's this great thing in there where JP is telling Edwin Blake, he says, "I got a entirely original idea, and we're going to take it to Sony, and it's going to be, a limited series, and it's about a convict who hooks up with a cop, and they go out and solve cases together, but they're always beating the shit out of each other." And I says, "Well, it sounds like 48 Hours with Nick Nolte." He says, "It sounds like 48 Hours with Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy." And he goes, "It is 48 hours, but we're doing it different." So, but to that producer, that's an original idea. And honest to God, I've heard stuff like this.
Oh my God.
Why can't he drive a BMW like Tom Cruise in The Firm? Why does he have to drive a Firebird? Well, because he's in Detroit and they don't like foreign cars there. Yeah, but it's just so. Yeah, and it became a hard sell. I got a lot of rejections, but
how long did it take? How long did it take overall to from when you were when you started to finish? And I know drafts and edits and all that stuff, but I mean, when you really were getting ready, did it take quite a while
to write it?
Oh no, to sell it once you got it done. And
a year, yeah. And I finally found an editor. My friend Bobby Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr., was with Skyhorse with several of his books, and he said, let me call Tony Lyons, the publisher. He might be interested in your book." And so I next hour later, Tony Lyons was on the phone, the publisher himself. That's what helps you when you got a Kennedy as a friend, right?
Right.
And he says, "Well, send me the pages." So I sent him the pages, and he says, "I like this." And he sent it to an editor, and she was like a fan of that kind of crime fiction. Okay, they had the humor and that thing, and she said, "I love this," and I had a deal in 2 weeks.
Wow.
So you just got to keep going. You got to, my agent didn't put that together, and my agent was kind of like, "Yeah, I don't want to deal with Skyhorse." And I said, "Well, where else do you want to go?" She said, "Well, I've tried everybody else." I said, "Well, then let's take the deal." And it's getting great. It's getting great reviews. I don't know. It's so hard with a novel these days to get the breakthrough. Just go into Barnes and Noble and look at the fiction shelves. I mean, there's just dozens of them. So how do you break through?
That leads into a question I also really want to ask you, and I also ask this of a lot of writers. So these are a couple here are not unique, but I'm always interested, and especially with somebody like you, because you have such a varied amount of experience across a long time. Is the industry better now for writers? And I should gauge it one more way. I know there's more avenues now. Self-publication is a lot more acceptable than it used to be. There's more indies, that kind of thing. But we also have seen, the majors get winnowed down, etc. What do you think? Is the landscape, and I'm speaking now of authors, book authors, but is this a better time, a lesser time? How do you see the industry right now for writers?
It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. It's gone the way of the music industry. You know, uh, somebody like my friend Bob Seger would get like a 3-album deal. They'd give him $300,000 to develop 3 albums. Hopefully, by the time he got to the 3rd album, he had a great book. I give you Elmore Leonard, who did 8 or 9, 10 books before he finally hit. He had really good editors. They'd say, "We're going to develop Dutch. We were going to stick with this guy. He's getting better and better with each book." Then he finally hits. That ain't happening anymore. They don't stick with you. They want you to hit it out of the park, or it's over. And the money, you can't make writing fiction. You can't make a living at it anymore. I mean, luckily I've got other cash flows and things coming in. Hollywood was very good to me, which allowed me to write that book actually, because I didn't need the money, right? But one of the things my latest agent told me, she says, "Well, Lowell, what are you expecting for this book? How much are you expecting to be paid?" And it had been 20 years, and I threw out a number, and she goes, "I think you're in for a really big surprise." I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "We have a saying, 5 is the new 50. So what was 50,000 before is now $5,000. Well, nobody can live on 5,000. I can't drive down the 405 for a week for $5,000. 405 is the big freeway here." So it becomes more of a labor of love. And, my son's a musician. He now wants more abuse. So he went to film school, just graduated from film school and with a major in directing. And, they put out 2 albums, but I mean, streaming and, I think you're better off being like an influencer on Instagram or something. I mean, I'm reading about like these kids that are making like thousands of dollars a week doing stupid stuff on Instagram. So yeah, I think it's more of a labor of love. Now, my agent, I'll just pass on what she said. The industry has changed because the older editors that loved books, loved to develop writers are gone. So now you got all these Ivy League kids that are editors, and all the publishers have consolidated to, like, I guess there's just like 3 big houses. They own everything, and the bean counters are in charge. Yeah. So
we're seeing that with everything. I mean, I'm a big sports guy, and of course I'm Northern California, so I've been an A's fan all my life. Well, I don't have to tell anybody who knows anything about sports what's going on with them right now, but it's everywhere. Everything comes down to numbers now. Everything has been quantified down to the nth degree, and there's huge fans of this, and I get it. I don't want to disparage anybody that thinks sabermetrics is the be all end all, but I think one of the things when you're a creative person is, or you're a fan of the creative process, is that unto itself, that creativity, that art, that thing that moves people, that thing that it was unexpected, that it was based almost entirely on what came out of someone's heart and soul when they write these words and then tear them all down and rewrite them again 50 times and on and on and on, right? That process. I know that process. And I think people who love books know that process. But I think you're right. The whole thing now seems to be controlled by people who are only looking at spreadsheets. And it drives me insane. They don't seem to have the soul of creativity, seems to have been really damaged. And I don't know how we get it back. I really don't. As long as the bean counters are in charge, and they seem to be fully in charge, I don't know how we get that back. But
the same thing has happened in film and television. It's a miracle that something of real value ever gets made. It's a miracle. And if you look at some of the greatest movies, they sat around for 4 or 5 years. They never got financed. They never got. One of my favorite directors, William Friedkin, just died. Yeah. And William Friedkin he would go to any limit to get to what he needed out of a scene, including like shooting off a shotgun to surprise somebody to get the reaction he wanted, paying off cops in New York to do the French Connection and a chase underneath the subway that goes on for 3 or 4 miles and almost killed people. And he got, and here's Academy Award winner, and great movies like To Live and Die in L.A., The Exorcist, French Connection. But in the end, he went off independent because he couldn't they wouldn't let him make, they wouldn't give him the control. And the people that are buying things, the producers, and a lot of them are like, I remember one guy came in, I was working with Billy Crystal, and guy came into Billy Crystal's office, who was a friend of a friend or something, and was interviewing with one of the producers, and I was there, and he was a car salesman. He says, but I love movies. If I can sell cars, I can sell movies. So it's the sales mentality, and the development executives, very few of them have studied this, Aristotelian story method or Robert McKee or any of the things that you need to do. They learn their craft by keeping a phone sheet and listening to their boss talk and make deals. Very much like Swimming with the Sharks. It's a very accurate movie with Kevin Spacey. It's called Swimming with Sharks. You remember that?
Yeah.
That's pretty accurate. I mean, people don't, torture their boss, but just the whole bullshit of it. But it's show business. It's not show art.
Yeah.
Sometimes some art gets made, though. And
well, along those lines, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the impact right now of artificial intelligence on this whole process. Now, maybe the impact is more on TV, but I think we'd be naive to think it's or movies. I think we'd be naive to not think it's going to impact publishing too, or is impacting publishing right now. What are your thoughts on AI? Do you see any positive out of it, or
no? I don't see anything positive out of it. It's insane. It removes the soul. Does AI have a human condition? Has AI lost a kid? That died when the kid was 3 years old. Has AI? It knows what to say about that, but has it felt that? Has AI had to kind of have starved to death to get something done, but then finally gets it done? No, it's ridiculous. But it reminds me of that. Remember the movie The Player?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and there's that scene where one of the guys is driving up Pacific Coast Highway here, coming from Malibu, and the guy paid by Tim, what's his face,
Robbins.
calls him. Tim Robbins says, Where are you?" He says, "I'm coming back from my AA meeting in Malibu." He says, "Oh, I didn't know you have a problem." He said, "I don't." He said, "But that's where all the deals are being done." I mean, That's a great line, right?
I think that was Peter Gallagher's character.
Yeah, Peter Gallagher. And when he finally gets together with Peter Gallagher, Peter Gallagher's got this great idea, and he tells it to Tim Robbins. He says, "It's simple. We don't even need a writer. We don't even need a writer." And Tim Robbins says, "Now if we can just figure out a way to get rid of the actors."
Right.
And they're the ones that, I mean, they want to buy their image forever. When you do a shoot and they control your image forever, which means they can bring you back.
Yeah.
It's insane.
It is a really insane.
And why? Rich, why? Where's all this going? I mean, what has this made life any better? I mean, if I walk around LA, I see a bunch of hunchbacks with their faces in the phone. I see young kids, spoiled kids on Montana and West Side here, eating like $40 lunches after school together at the Blue Plate, and they're all in their phones and nobody's talking to each other. Is this, where are we going with this? Yeah. Now I sound like the old fuck, but where are we going?
No, I'm with you. I am firmly in your camp. I walk, I live in a college town, and I'll walk down the streets, and it's all I see. Everybody. I mean, I'm dodging people because everyone's looking this way at their phone, or you'll pass a busy cafe, and every table outside is full, and no one's talking to each other.
Exactly.
They're looking at their phones. It is really mind-blowing to me. I'm really not sure where we're going. Well, I have no answer, because I think I have my cynical answer, but it scares the shit out of me. So I don't know if I even want to go there, but it just feels like feels kind of apocalyptic at times. It really does.
Have you read Brave New World lately? Read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and now they're talking about creating artificial wombs, so that and they've done it with some animals. And I'm thinking, God, this is Aldous Huxley's birthing centers in Brave New World. I mean, we've got a combo of 1984 and Brave New World, and also everybody's on drugs in Brave New World,
Yeah.
or THX 328, the one with 238, the one that George Lucas did. It started as his with Robert Duvall, great film. But I mean, it's like, are these people prophets? It almost seems like it. This is crazy. I just like, if the quality of life was getting better, I'd say, yeah, it's great, but it isn't. We're becoming more detached.
Yeah.
The thing that was supposed to bring us together, remember the internet would be,
Yeah.
and Facebook and all that, is actually spreading us apart.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't think anyone with two working brain cells could disagree with that. I've got one other question, but I actually am going to interject one in between here. So those of you who are not watching on YouTube, if you're listening on the podcast, Lowell's wearing a Los Angeles County Coroner shirt, and I'm dying to ask, what's the story behind the LA County Coroner T-shirt?
Well, there's a scene in Below the Line where where my lead character Eddie Blake, he needs to go to the coroner's office to get an autopsy report. And I had never been to the LA coroner's office. I'd been in Detroit. Now I knew what Detroit medical examiner, wrongful death, homicide reports look like, but I didn't know what they looked like in LA. So doing my research, I go down to the Los Angeles County coroner's office. And I'm waiting in a waiting room because I'm going to meet with the PR guy there. And there's people sitting around that are crying. And I mean, they're having the most horrible day of their lives because they're coming to pick up their loved ones, effects, whether they're homicide victims or heart attack victims, anybody in there has been for an autopsy. And I look over and there's a door, and the door says skeletons in the closet. So I turn to the receptionist and I says, what does that mean? Skeletons in the closet? And he says, oh, that's our gift shop. Go check it out. And I said, gift shop? They go, yeah. So I go through this door and I walk into this entirely different world with gags. You can buy crime scene tape. You can buy the outlines of dead people, so you can put it on the floor in your carpet or in your kitchen or whatever. And of course, there's a bunch of pictures up there of movie stars who signed their pictures. And you can buy coroner gear like this shirt. And I thought, 10 feet away, people are having the worst day of their lives, and over here, everybody's having a ball. And they're selling, stuff off of it. And that's high contrast. And I love high contrast, Elmore was really good at high contrast. He had one of his killer meetings, another guy in a bar that said, it's nice to be nice. You look for that high. And I said, oh boy, this is beautiful. And then I used it in the book. I have my character buy a T-shirt and a hat, and when he comes walking out of the guy that's been following him thinks that he's actually gotten a job at the coroner's office. He's just wearing the stuff.
Oh my, that's hilarious.
They closed that though. They closed it. They I guess they closed the gift shop. I don't think I complacent, but it had been there for years.
I'm almost speechless that you would have a gift shop at a county coroner's office. I should have known that, but I did not know that.
That's Hollywood. That's Hollywood. And of course, you got to have the obligatory pictures of the stars with their, And she told me, she says, Dustin Hoffman came in here and he bought like $1,000 worth of stuff. I said, what? Because they was shooting there. And I said, for what? And he says, oh, for his family. It's Dustin Hoffman. Thanks, thanks to the coroner, it's a pleasure doing it.
Well, that's
hilarious.
Really something. I'm gonna segue us to the end there. The one thing I was gonna ask you, I noticed all the guitars in the back. I know you're a musician. I should have asked you some questions about maybe the impact of music on your life, but maybe we'll do that another time. But I like to end on something fun. I hope it's fun. It's probably a little corny, but it's something I do on a regular basis. I'd like to offer you an option here. Let's just say I had the power to put you together with one of the following three people for whatever, a drink, dinner, whatever, talk about art. Which one of the three would you pick and why? the options I'll give you are Alfred Hitchcock, Greta Garbo, or John Wilkes Booth. I could put you together with one of those people for a conversation. Who would you choose?
I'll take John Wilkes Booth every day because uh, I guess it's just my interest in the dark side. I want to know what he think he was doing, and I'd also like to tell him how he really blew it. Okay, by killing the president, he really blew it. Alfred Hitchcock, I have a little bit of a connection with him. One of the residents in my building, she developed dementia, and we were able to take some of the things out of her apartment that she didn't want anymore, or her power of attorney said they didn't need anymore. And I got this beautiful white fox fur, beautiful, with her name sewn in it and all that. I said, "Oh, this looks good." So I grabbed that. It appraised out at $300, but it would have been $5,000 in the '60s when it was given to her. And I said, "Well, who gave it to her?" He said, "Alfred Hitchcock. She was his personal assistant." And there, her name is right there in IMDb in Psycho.
Wow,
Dolores Stockton. So wow. I've got that coat. So I got a connection to Hitch already. All right.
All right. Well, yeah, I think we'd all like to grill John Wilkes Booth because, I don't think you have to be a major historian to know a lot of things went a very different way than they would have, and we're still paying the price to some extent today. So
yeah, we sure are.
Good choice. Well, Lowell, thanks so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I would encourage everybody, if you haven't, check out Below the Line. It's a great, fun read. If you're a fan of Elmore Leonard, or any number of other folks like that, John C. MacDonald. I mean, Lowell's right there in the conversation. This is a fabulous book. I really think you'll like it, and I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Rich, it's been my pleasure, and it's not a mystery; it's a novel. There's a difference.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to leave everybody with the same thing that I always leave you with. Two things. One, please hit subscribe. Please leave the review. Help people find the show. That would be really great. Number one, and number two, just remember, tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So please make today count. Until then, I'm Rich Eisen. This has been the Open Mic. Take care.